So video is obviously very hard to get across the feeling of flight, so we're going to talk in depth.
Left side of the screen, there's now, or left side of the HUD, you now have a speed bar, and you're moving your speed up and down by pressing W and S, say for mouse and keyboard. We'll get to HOTAS in a second, promise me. But yeah, so as you can see, like if you press W and then you immediately let go, the ship stops accelerating. That's unlike what we had previously, where you had this kind of defined speed range, and you press W and S to move the target speed up and down that range. But we don't have that range anymore, right? So the speed just moves up and down depending on whether you're accelerating your thrusters or not. And it seems kind of subtle, but I promise you, this is a really target velocity that the coupled mode flight is trying to get you toward, right? So if you turn, your speed is going to change. You know, your forward speed is going to change from that dot and what that dot is supposed to be. And coupled mode essentially amounts to moving your speed toward that dot. It wants your forward velocity to be held at that dot. So you turn in coupled mode, and you'll see that IFCS will automatically bring your speed up to that dot. This doesn't happen in decoupled mode, and that's one of the big differences between the two modes, is you get this like...
The HUD there, we've got this sort of thrust capacity bar. This allows you to finally control your thrust power, lets you manage your accelerations. So this sets how strong your thrust is in all axes when IFCS is trying to move your ship, and it gives you that fine control. So if you don't want to go at full tilt, you can just bring it down, and then you're going to move at a much slower rate. You want to get it faster, just scroll it back up again. So we obviously talked about mouse and keyboard. Let's have a look at HOTAS.
So here in the Aurora, I'm just holding W at this point, accelerating past. You see I'm going to go past the SCM speed, and the ship just keeps accelerating. Now obviously in coupled, this is happening with just accelerating forward, but you can actually do this with any of the strafe axes as well, and you can do this in decoupled. You literally just accelerate for as long as you need, and you go up to the top speed of the ship, which is pretty much the same as the cruise speeds we had previously. Though there is another change that's kind of important here. When you go past the safe maneuvering speed of the ship, coupled will start limiting your angular velocity, and this is kind of something we had a while ago in cruise. And this is kind of a feature of coupled, because if you're above those speeds and your thrusters are just not quite strong enough to move you around, you're just going to drift for miles and miles and miles. So this is kind of like, you could think of it as a safety feature of coupled that's saying, hey, you're not really going to be able to practically turn at these speeds because you're going to drift so much. So I'm going to limit your turn speed to try and keep you from drifting. Now if you turn on decoupled
mid-flight, then you get to freely rotate around. So we're going as sort of, you can see the target velocity dot there. I'm in decoupled, I'm going all over the place. If you were to go back into coupled at this point, you're going to have a huge amount of slide. Obviously, you've got that huge velocity going there. But yeah, they're two different flight modes. They behave very differently. You don't have to use both. You can use one or the other.
I think it's really cool as well that previously getting into cruise speeds and you press the SCM safety button, and that will bring up these two triangles on your speed bar, and this is going to hold you inside a certain speed range where we can pretty much make sure that you're not going to drift too much. And we'll reevaluate those speeds for all the ships to kind of keep you from sliding too much and keep you from getting into territory where the ship's just very difficult to control. And so this is on by default. You can obviously change that in the settings. And we expect that the more experienced pilots will be able to fly with this off, and they can sort of edge up to the higher speeds and not lose control too much.
Yeah, it's not like hard cap. Like it's a range of velocity and speed. You're still going to slide in those ranges. This in action. We do a lot of this by looking at the MFDs, just because it's a really clear way of showing it in a presentation format. So as you can see now, every thruster has a little item on the power UI, and they draw power dynamically as the thrust is given to them to move the ship. Fuel is the same as this. Just imagine the power, but replace fuel, it's the same. And as you're flying around here, you can see your main thrusters going up, using more power. The heat goes up as well with them. Now I'm stopping, so the retros went up there. Let's have a look what happens. Like some of the other systems we have in the game, you can move the power around, so let's have a look at that. So you can manually underpower or overpower each thruster, and your ship's going to behave accordingly. So here I've reduced the power capacity on the rear thrusters, and this also affects heat as well. So if you're underpowering thrusters, they're going to generate less heat. Afterburner is actually just a facet of this system. It's just a shortcut straight into overpower mode. And overclocking is then another level on top of this, where you get that extra performance, you get more heat, more wear, and it's all systemic. They all just work together. Underpowered thrusters burn less fuel, overpowered ones generate more heat. If you're running low on fuel, you can throttle your thrusters down to just eke out that more performance. And this is all part of a system to give us consequences.
Normally, and then you press shift to afterburn, and you'll see you're getting overpowered here. Now, for the sake of showing this, we've massively increased the wear number. So the wear number is that middle number, that's number 15 in the middle of the thrusters. So you overheat your thrusters too much, that number is going to start going up. Again, don't worry, it's faster here than it will be in the game. And you can see that the thrusters are starting to not use as much power as they were. I think that the ideal behavior here is that they actually draw as much power as they would have, but you're just not getting the same amount of thrust out of the thruster. So you continue afterburning like this, your thrusters get weaker and weaker and weaker, and you'll immediately start feeling the ship get more and more sluggish because you're just, you know, you're
if you keep doing this, bad things are going to happen. The main visual cue of this is thruster misfires. Now, misfires are going to be things that happen on all items when they're getting worn and overheated. And for thrusters specifically, they're going to accidentally backfire like a... Lots of heat is being generated here. So to manage that, I just bring the thrust capacity down really low, generates a lot less heat. As I bring it up, the power and heat go up in turn. Again, afterburner is just a shortcut to overpowering. And this is where you're going to be managing stuff. And the great thing about this, you've got your throttle, you've got your afterburn, or your throttle, your thrust capacity. You don't need to go in your MFDs, like flying around, doing this, trying to work out what's going on. You've got those two big items.
GLADIUS is going to shoot some thrusters. It's already shot the one on the right there. The more and more you do this, you can see the thruster is starting to get damaged. And you will immediately feel this in the handling of the ship. So the idea here, so you can see these two thrusters have been damaged. If you try and move, you're just not going to get the strength out of them that you need. And the expectation here is that we want more interesting combat, so that, you know, I think currently people just go straight for the cockpit if they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But actually, it could actually be another strategy to go for the main thrusters of a ship, or even if you're good enough to hit the maneuver thrusters, you can cripple a ship so it can't even roll.
Yeah, at the moment it's very time to kill, and we've always talked about time to disable. You want to be able to board ships that you've taken out. At the moment you can't really do that, but this is a system that allows you to cripple that ship. You've got distortion weapons to do that. You can physically damage them. So it's all building up to that, grabbing hold of other ships.
You know, because the thrusters are drawing power so dynamically as well, if you, for example, take out the power plant of a ship, they're not going to be able to power any of their thrusters. The ship's going to be completely incapacitated. You just won't be able to. So if we look at the GLADIUS has these two really big thrusters. Straight away, if I make a left turn, you can see how much more drift there is than there used to be. You really want to feel the momentum when you're moving a ship around. So I think the GLADIUS has quite a few thrusters that can point downward. So you will actually feel differences in trying to strafe in certain directions. And of course, the angular acceleration is also super important here. The layout of the GLADIUS's thrusters actually gives it more pitch authority than yaw. And so in this ship, that's going to be the dominant way. You're going to want to try and use your roll and pitch to get on target and hold the target in front of you. And that may not be what we have with other ships, right?
Variety and character.
Yeah, this variety is super, super important to us. So you can see in the outside view here, as you move around, it really, I can't stress how cool it feels to have this momentum. It really makes flying, it makes it arguably more difficult, but I think it's more rewarding when you fly really well, and that's really cool. So I think we will move on.
Pick a different ship.
Yeah, we'll move on to the Hornet.
So yeah, Hornet in comparison to the Gladius, much beefier, much heavier, and it has weaker directions in all other axes except for going forwards, where it has that huge main engine. So far more acceleration going forwards, and it's shorter than the Gladius. So it actually has weaker pitch authority, but its yaw is much stronger. So if you only have those two ships, you're going to be flying them two completely different ways. You can fly them the same way. One's going to be worse at what you're doing than the other. So you need to learn and feel how those two ships behave and fly them accordingly. Again, very hard to see in a video. Recommend you go play this and see how it feels. I just want to do a tiny bit of audience participation at this point. How many of you have a Gladius? Stick your hands up.
It's not that many.
Not that many. How many of you have a Hornet?
It's a lot more.
Then let's look at another ship. How many people have an Aurora? That's a lot more. So yeah, the Aurora.
We'll take a look at the Aurora. So I think we've been kind of guilty of punishing the Aurora a bit too much, making it pretty much useless in combat. And you know, it's still a starter ship, so it's still not going to be anywhere near as good as the Gladius and the Hornet. But using this new system of assigning thruster strengths, we can actually have it give some strengths. Like one of the big strengths of the ship is that it's really, really light. It's much lighter than the Hornet. And so even though it has weaker thrusters overall, it actually has I think it actually has slightly more acceleration in some strafe directions than the Hornet. But it obviously sacrifices not even close to as powerful main thruster. And so, you know, in the Hornet, if you're going to be getting your back out and using the main thruster, you can't really do that as much in the Aurora. It's just not quite going to be as useful. We can also use the previous ship item 2.0 systems to make the Aurora not as useful, say, as a Hornet, because, you know, maybe you just can't distribute thrust well enough, or you just don't have the items to match with the Gladius.
This is the most popular ship in the game.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
We definitely didn't appreciate it enough in all the previous tunings. And
yeah, we don't want to nerf this ship for sure. It should still be useful, even though it's not as good as the better ships. The IFCS editor tool, and this is going to allow us to do live editing. So we run in the game. I'm going to spawn a Gladius here.
It's interesting, every studio has their own favorite ship. So
yeah,
the US studios love to test everything on the Hornet. The UK loves to do it in the Gladius.
Okay, so we have these dev tools now, which we've never had before. So as I move around, we can see the thrust output and the gimbal direction on all of the thrusters while you fly around. And this level of information we've just never really had before. Now these big red and blue cross in the middle of the screen here, this is the thrust strength for linear thrust for this ship. So you can see you got 65.8 meters a second forward, minus 27 to the left and 27 to the right as well. So we have all the thrusters in a list here, right? So these are the thrusters. We can click on them, and they'll highlight where on the ship that is. And then we can actually hand edit the thrust capacities. So these are the main thrusters. If I make these 10, you can immediately see that the ship's handling, or the ship's forward acceleration has changed. If I try and accelerate forward, it's going to be a lot slower. And there's no reloading of the editor or anything. This is immediate. You immediately feel the difference.
We have a lot of ships in the game, so if we have to reload the editor every time we want to do it, it adds minutes times hundreds of ships. It gets very long. So
to go the opposite, why don't we take some of these thrusters at the front here, and we're just going to make them really strong. We're going to get, like, I don't know,
a great career in
100 million. That'll do. So we now have 532,000 meters a second forward. So you can feel the difference in the roll is just immediate difference. We get up to speed really fast. So we have this live editing. Now, obviously, we mentioned earlier that hand editing thrust capacities is just kind of a no-no. I mean, you could do it, but it's basically impossible to guess what these what these accelerations are going to be. So to solve that, we have this calculator here. We can enter the ship's desired handling. So I'm actually going to put these back to a sensible number for a second. Is that right? There we go. So if I say we got 15 meters a second in the forward Y direction of the ship, if we just change this to 100.
And this is different from where we are at the moment, where it's all based off goal times. This is a different way of doing this.
So you enter in the desired acceleration, and you click Tune Ship, and it'll automatically calculate the thrust capacities of all the thrusters. And it will obviously, now you can see that the forward acceleration is now 100 meters a second. This obviously, not like, you can sit and calculate that number on paper, but you'd just be insane to do that. I don't know why you'd want to do that. So we have this now, and again, you can see how live this is. It's literally taken me like seconds to change the handling of the ship. We also have all of this extra information here, so we can fly around the ship and monitor what it's doing. And this level of sort of interactive ship design is something we've just never had before. So this is really. We're going to take a look at atmospheric flight.
Yeah.
Fly down to a planet.
Pay close attention to the audio.
Yeah, the audio is fantastic here. So there we go. Right. Obviously, if you hard yaw in a plane in real life, it's just not going to work, right? And then as you see, if we roll and pitch, you can actually turn so much faster. In fact, you can actually almost completely arrest the drift that you would get in space. So you see how hard we can turn. We actually start to black out. That's not blackout from the thrusters. That is blackout from the aerodynamic forces on the ship, which is not something you get in space. I think this change this has to flight. You can see this is someone like, well, it's me trying to yaw really hard, and you see how the ship like torques back into the wind. If you, for example, try and hover your ship and then accelerate to cruise speeds sideways, the ship will experience all these aerodynamic forces, and it'll actually pivot the ship back into the wind, just to sort of get this difference, right? The ships are obviously, like planes in real life, don't fly sideways. So
the GLADIUS is probably one of the closest ships we have to a modern day plane. So it has that huge lift area.
So let's
isn't it? It's not really got much of a lift surface. So it flies a lot slower because it struggles to cut through the air. It's got a lot more instability, as you can see there. We're trying to yaw here, but it's just not doing it because it's hitting that wind and kicking back. Another downside to this, beyond that, the thrusters have to do a heck of a lot more work just to do this. So they're running hotter, they're consuming more fuel. Doesn't mean that it's like this all the time.
And this, unfortunately, we couldn't have aerodynamic flight at the Drake Virtual Training Facility today, but this difference is massive, right? If you try and strafe around and like circle strafe people in space, and you try and do that in atmosphere, it's going to go quite badly wrong for you. You need to really adjust your flight strategies in atmosphere. And the hope is that you're going to go into atmosphere, and atmospheric flight is going to be a bit more like planes, and that difference is going to be really, really drastic. And having that difference in gameplay is
a second to see just how hot your thrusters are getting.
So if you look at the target velocity as well, you can see that the ship is not actually able to reach the target velocity, and that's because of the drag. So if you pump more power into your thrusters, you actually can increase your top speed in the atmosphere, because your terminal velocity is obviously going to be a bit higher.
Yeah. So what we've done here is we've reduced the thrust capacity down. You see the heat's sort of reached an equilibrium down, those two mains, it's at 350. Gone to overclock them now, and now we can hit that speed. We probably could keep ticking it up, but you're paying the price of more heat. So now my thrusters are overheating. So how do I stop that? Turn them off. The reheat's going away now. Probably best to turn off overclock as well, otherwise when you turn them back on, they're just going to go back into that cycle. Put them back in again. There you go, you've prevented yourself overheating. So yeah, that's looking at managing. I think we're a bit